When I read this, I was like, oh my God, this is super interesting. Now, the reality is that the majority of people wouldn't be bothered to check, but I just couldn't believe that this could actually happen. So in today's video, we're going to be looking at some things that supermarkets don't want you to know. So basically, weird tricks that supermarkets use to get your money. Now, this video is completely and utterly inspired by this book. It's The Undercover Economist. I will link it down below. It is a brilliant, brilliant book and I thoroughly recommend it. It goes through all sorts of things around economics and why things work the way they work. So if I just tell you what it says on the back, it says, ever wondered why the gap between rich and poor nations is so great, why it's so difficult to get a foot on the property ladder, or where the banks went wrong. This book offers the hidden story behind these and other forces that shape our day-to-day lives. Definitely recommend. Like I said, I'll link down below. But basically in this video, I'm going to tell you about what he talks about in one of the chapters. And the chapter is literally called What Supermarkets Don't Want You to Know. All the credit in this information goes to Tim Harford, who's the author of the book. But anyway, without further ado, let's jump straight in. So naturally, some people are willing to pay more for items than others. If you're a supermarket, how do you price what you are selling? Do you charge more and have less sales? Or do you drop your prices with the hope that you'll get enough of an increase in sales? Now, the risk there is obviously that your increase in sales will not be enough to cover the cost of sales. So it's a bit of a delicate balance, but the answer tends to be you charge both prices. And this is where it gets interesting and mind-blowing. The example that they go into in the book is that of Costa Coffee. Now, apparently a long time ago, and they don't do this anymore, but apparently they used to charge an extra 10p for fair trade coffee, which doesn't seem like a big deal, right? Until you do some digging. Apparently the true cost of a proper fair trade coffee only ended up being about 1p per cup, which means that the other 9p per cup was actually going to Costa's bottom line, which is crazy. Now, obviously this ended up being revealed and they said they wouldn't do this anymore. But the reason that they did it was that it basically allowed you to tell them two things about yourself if you went for this coffee. The first was that you thought that fair trade was something that should be supported, which is great. But the second was that you don't mind paying more for something. Now, this is a really important piece of information for any sort of store or supermarket that you go into. Another example of this, which just completely blew my mind, was apparently a long time ago, Amazon used to sort of track what you spent and give you different prices. So I could log on to my account and see a completely different price for something than one of my friends, purely based on our spending habits. I couldn't believe it when I found that out. Obviously it's not the case anymore. They were found out and obviously it was a big issue and they've stopped doing it now. But I just couldn't believe that this could actually happen. Now, a good modern day example of this in another coffee shop, not quite as sly as what happened in the past, but on page 39 of the book, he actually looks at a Starbucks menu. And it goes to list sort of like cappuccino, mochas, white chocolate mochas, venti chocolate mochas. And then he says, to translate, you've got cappuccino, no frills, hot chocolate, no frills, mix them together, you feel special. But the point is that the more you go into these like coffees with all the additions, you are signaling to them that you are willing to spend more money. And that's important because it gives them an in to then target you with more things that you might buy. He then talks about 3 strategies that these sort of stores or supermarkets can use to sort of weed out the customers that are willing to pay more. Now, the first and least interesting one is the sort of first degree, which ends up being people like estate agents. So this is the very individualized approach where you have someone who spends one-on-one time with you and is very skilled in figuring out how much money you have and how much money you're willing to spend. This usually only really works with high value items such as cars or houses. The second is group targeting. So this is where you've got targeted pricing for certain groups. So for example, discounts on rail for elderly people and things like that. Now, the example he gives for this, well, he gives two examples. The first is somewhere like Disneyland, Florida, offering discounts to locals. Now, the reason for that is that locals are more likely to come more often if they get the discount, whereas tourists who only come once will probably come no matter the price that you charge them. Another example is a coffee shop in a tube station or train station where they offer a discount for local workers. Now, the reason there isn't necessarily because the local workers can't afford to pay more for coffee, but it's actually because they are far more likely to walk down the road and pay less for a coffee because they have time on their lunch break. Whereas the rushed commuters who literally just want their caffeine fix are not going to be looking at the price. They are more likely to just see the first coffee shop and go for it and pay more. And the third and most interesting thing that really made me think is the self-incrimination aspect, which is what we were talking about earlier on. He talks about there being 2 Marks and Spencer's shops in, I think it was Liverpool Street, and they are about 500 meters apart, and in one of them the exact same items were about 15% more expensive. Now, the reality is that the majority of people wouldn't be bothered to check, is that M&S more expensive than this one? Especially with something like 15%. When you look at it in individual items, it's really not that much. It might be 10p on this item and 10p on this item. But over time, that adds up to a lot of money, both for you as the consumer and for the supermarkets when they are selling thousands and thousands of products. That's a lot of money added to their bottom line. Now, the other thing that he talks about is how what catches our eye when we walk into this store is not a coincidence. Store plans are very carefully thought out on the basis of what people are going to spend. He goes into 2 different Sainsbury's, one in Tottenham Court Road and one in another area. And in Tottenham Court Road, all he sees is like Tropicana, expensive waters, and no Sainsbury's own brand items. And the reason for that is because in central London, in a place like Tottenham Court Road, you're more likely going to get people just fleeting through and tourists and people who work there who are unlikely to be sort of shopping around for the cheapest item. So they're not even given the option to buy Sainsbury's own stuff. However, in the other area he goes to, you actually see more of the Sainsbury's own stuff, but you still have the option for the more expensive stuff like Tropicana, for example. So most people in that area might go for the Sainsbury's own and be more price sensitive. The people who want to splash out or don't care would still go for the Tropicana. Hopefully that will make sense. Obviously he goes into this a lot better in the book, but this is just me trying to summarize it for you because when I read this, I was like, oh my God, this is super interesting. Now, the other thing that they do is sometimes change prices of items. So for example, when you have sales, one of the things you might think is, why do they have 30% off twice a year instead of just having 5% off all year round? And he goes into a lot of detail around this, but he talks about how it is an element of self-targeting where some people will care, some people won't. You'll have the bargain hunters who will seek out the cheaper items and perhaps go to a different store or just go for the cheaper options at the time in the supermarket they're in. And then you'll have like the dinner party people who know exactly what they need and they're not going to care whether the item is more expensive or not. And he almost talks about it as not seeing sales as reductions in prices, but seeing non-sales as almost like the increase in prices. And the only reason that this tends to work really well for supermarkets is that most people tend to be too lazy to shop around and be like, is this particular product more expensive or cheaper in this supermarket versus this one this time? And most people won't be like, okay, I'll get these items now from Sainsbury's and then I'll get these items from Tesco. They will just do all of their shopping at the same place. The other trick is packaging. So a lot of this sort of supermarket owned brands, when you look at the packaging, it's not very nice. And apparently it would be super cheap for them to make it look nice, just design a nicer packaging and sell it with the nicer packaging. But actually that almost like bad packaging is actually done on purpose. And the reason for it is best explained by airport lounges. So if you think about airport lounges, the reason that they're not made any nicer than they are is because it gives the airports a chance to sell the exclusive lounges. Who would buy a pass to a nice lounge if the main airport terminal was nice? So it's sort of a similar sort of thing here, because it gives the illusion of a less superior product. A great example as well that he gives of this is a printer from a long time ago, where apparently they had two models where one was like a lot more expensive than another. And they ended up finding out that the lesser model was exactly the same. All that happened was they put a chip inside it after manufacture to slow it down. Like, that just blew my mind. It's just so weird. But yeah, that's basically the gist of it. Hopefully you found something interesting here, and perhaps you will be a little bit more careful around pricing. I know that I definitely learnt a lot, and hopefully this was interesting. I know it's slightly different than my usual type of content, but yeah, I wanted to share it with you guys. And if you're interested in the book, I will link it down below. Anyway, that's it for now, and I'll see you in the next video. Bye.